Namaste, good morning, and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Om Sarva Jiva Papanashakaranam Bhaveshwaram Swikritang Jagarbhavasa Deha Pashamidrisham Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Tannamami deva deva Ramakrishnam Ishwaram Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatar Varishtaya Chate Namaha. We salute Sri Ramakrishna, God of gods and Lord of existence, who of his own free will took on human birth and lived a luminous life of divine play for the destruction of human ills. We salute that incarnation, Paramahamsa Ramakrishna, who was worshipped by pure-hearted disciples like Vivekananda, and who was worshipped ceaselessly by Sri Sarada Devi, the Divine Mother herself. Om Tavakatamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadatatam Bhuvi grinanti ye bhurida janaha. O Lord, your nectar-like words are praised by the wise and full of auspiciousness. They destroy the curse of evil, bring good to those who hear them, and bring new life to those who are scorched by the ills of worldly existence. Magnanimous indeed are they who spread your message. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So today we continue our study of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, where we left off last time. We are on the chapter entitled Sri Ramakrishna's Last Visit to Keshab Chandra Sen, the leader of a branch of the Brahmo Samaj. And it's been a beautiful chapter. What we had read previously dealt with Sri Ramakrishna's actual visit to Keshab, but then we came to a point in the reading last week where it said that Sri Ramakrishna left for Dakshineshwar, left Keshab's house for Dakshineshwar, where he lived, with one or two devotees. But on his way to Dakshineshwar, he stopped at Joy Gopal Sen's house, another devotee's house, and there friends and relatives and neighbors had gathered to see him. And so then what continues to the end of the chapter is his conversation at Joy Gopal Sen's house. And there are only 4 pages left in this chapter, but we've never covered 4 pages, usually a page and a half, 2 pages at most in a class, because we're going to have a long break now until sometime in January, probably late January. I would like to come to the end of the chapter, but I don't think that will be possible, and we shouldn't disrespect the text by just rushing through it. So we'll see where we come to. So in what had just been discussed, Sri Ramakrishna had been speaking about the impermanence of the world, how everything here is impermanent, and that's something that we all know. Even non-spiritual people know it, though they don't act on it. We all hope that the things we love and like will be with us eternally, and we have somewhere the hope that maybe we will live in the body eternally also. But rationally, we all know that everything here is impermanent. So Sri Ramakrishna had been speaking about the impermanence. So if it's something that we all know, why do religious traditions, especially like Vedanta and Buddhism, make a point of the impermanence of everything? It's for the very reason I stated, that we know it rationally, but we don't feel it and we don't act on it. And so if the spiritual path requires dispassion, non-attachment, then in order to inspire that, we have to come to terms with the impermanence of the world, the fact that everything is constantly changing. We try to grasp at things, but nothing is really graspable. Nothing stays with us for long. And so a neighbor of Joy Gopal Sen, in the midst of this conversation of Sri Ramakrishna's, says, "Why, sir, should one hold on to God with one hand and to the world with the other? Why should one even stretch out one hand to hold the world if it is impermanent?" And so this is a good question, but it shows an immaturity of understanding that if the world is impermanent, why should one hold to it with one hand while holding to God with the other hand? Well, you're going to. The problem is we're holding on to an impermanent world with both hands. And so what Sri Ramakrishna had said previously is that we should hold to God with one hand and to the world with the other hand to do the necessary things in order to lead our life. Because without being able to lead our life forward, we can't even do spiritual practice. So instead of holding on to the world with both hands, take one hand and hold on to God, and then do what you have to do. And so this man is asking, but if the world is impermanent, why should we hold on to it at all? As if he were about to let go of it with both hands. So that wasn't going to happen. But to Sri Ramakrishna, it doesn't make fun of his question. He takes it seriously and says, "The world is not impermanent if one lives there after knowing God. Listen to another song." And the song is, "O mind, you do not know how to farm. Fallow lies the field of your life. If you had only worked it well, how rich a harvest you might reap. Hedge it around with Kali's name, if you would keep your harvest safe. This is the stoutest hedge of all, for death himself cannot come near it." And then Sri Ramakrishna asks, "Did you hear the song? Hedge it about with Kali's name. If you would hedge it about with Kali's name, if you would keep your harvest safe." So then Sri Ramakrishna says, "Surrender yourself to God and you will achieve everything. This is the stoutest hedge of all," quoting the song again, "for death himself cannot come near it." So here Sri Ramakrishna says something unusual. He says that the world is not impermanent if one lives there after knowing God. So what could that possibly mean? It doesn't mean that suddenly the things of the world become permanent, or that your pleasures become permanent, or that your physical life becomes permanent, or the things that we want to be permanent become permanent. No, then you see the world as the playground of God, God manifested as all things. So it's God which is impermanent. So it's not, again, that the world becomes permanent and suddenly, this is what I wanted after all. Now find me a world where everything that I want is going to stay here with me. No, it's still the same impermanent world, but it's not impermanent in the sense it was before, because now you don't feel it a mansion of misery, but a mansion of mirth, because you see that it is the eternal play of God. And it's God that you see in the world as manifest as the world. It's God that is permanent. And that's the way you see the world now. So Sri Ramakrishna continues, yes, speaking of the song and it's saying about Kali's name, the mantra, yes, it is a strong hedge indeed. If you but realize God, you won't see the world as unsubstantial. So again, what does that mean? It means you see it permeated by God. It's God which is the substance, not the little things that we are attached to. He who has realized God knows that God himself has become the world and all living beings. When you feed your child, you should feel that you are feeding God. So then, yes, it's not that the child is going to live forever or that you are forever going to have your child, but now your relationship is to the eternal through the manifest. You should look on your father and mother as veritable manifestations of God and the Divine Mother and serve them as such. If a man enters the world after realizing God, he does not generally keep up physical relations with his wife. Both of them are devotees. They love to talk only of God and pass their time in spiritual conversation. They serve other devotees of God, for they know that God alone has become all living beings. And knowing this, they devote their lives to the service of others. So here he says that if a man enters the world after realizing God, he generally does not keep up physical relations with his wife. And then both of them are devotees, and he describes how they live. So a neighbor says, "But sir, such a husband and wife are not to be found anywhere." Master, yes, they can be found, though they may be very rare. Worldly people can't recognize them. In order to lead such a life, both husband and wife must be spiritual. So here he puts down the conditions where that is possible. They both have to be spiritual, already spiritual. It is possible to lead such a life if both of them have tasted the bliss of God. Now, why is that? It's possible to live such a life if both of them have tasted the bliss of God. Because we can't give up something until we've tasted something higher, something that we are very attached to, something that is part of our instinctual nature and so forth. We can't give it up until we taste something higher. So it's possible if they have both had a taste of the bliss of God. God's special grace is necessary to create such a couple. So again, he recognizes that this is not easy and that such cases are rare. And he's laying out the circumstances that make such cases possible. Otherwise, there will always be misunderstanding between them. In that case, the one has to leave the other. Life becomes very miserable if husband and wife do not agree. And of course, he doesn't mean agree about everything, but agree about the spiritual life and about living the type of life that he's talking about. The wife will say to her husband day and night, "Why did my father marry me to such a person? I can't get enough to eat or to feed my children. I haven't clothes enough to cover my body or to give my children. I haven't received a single piece of jewelry from you. How happy you have made me. Ah, you keep your eyes closed and mutter the name of God. Now at least give up all these crazy ideas." So, of course, when Sri Ramakrishna says this, that she's saying that we don't have enough to eat, we don't have clothes for me or my children. If that were actually the case, Sri Ramakrishna would scold the husband and say, "What kind of a person are you?" As he scolded his distant nephew, Hazra, or cousin, Hazra, for not taking care of his family and his village. He scolded him severely and told him he had to go home and take care of them, and tried to embarrass him into taking care of his family by saying, "If you don't take care of them, who is going to? Are you going to leave it to the neighbors to take care of your wife and children?" Trying to call up some sense of manhood, some sense of responsibility in Hazra, who was not very strong on either count. But here he's saying, he has the wife saying that not because they don't have food and clothing, but because the wife is complaining because she doesn't have the clothing and as much food and clothing as she wants, or the high quality or the elegance or whatever that she expects. And so again, this shouldn't be understood to mean that such a man lets his wife and children go hungry or unclothed. No, not at all. That Sri Ramakrishna had no patience with that. It just means that, and of course, here he was talking to men, and he was trying to get the point across to them. But the same goes, and I've seen the opposite side, where the woman is the one who is spiritual, the man is not, and so then the complaints go in in the opposite direction. So, devotee, there are such obstacles, certainly. Besides, the children may be disobedient. There is no end of difficulties. Now, sir, what is the way? Master, it is extremely difficult to practice spiritual discipline and at the same time lead a householder's life. There are many handicaps: disease, grief, poverty, misunderstanding with one's partner, and disobedient, stupid, and stubborn children. That's a rather strong statement. Disobedient, stupid, and stubborn children. Not many people would admit that that's the case with their children, even when it is. I don't have to give you a list of them, meaning that you live in the world, you know quite well the list of obstacles that are there. Neighbor, must one leave home then? Master, no, not altogether. Whenever you have leisure, go into solitude for a day or two. At that time, don't have any relations with the outside world, and don't hold any conversation with worldly people on worldly affairs. You must either live in solitude or in the company of holy men. That is, once in a while, you must live in solitude or in the company of holy men. Neighbor, how can one recognize a holy man? Master, he who has surrendered his body, mind, and innermost self to God is surely a holy man. He who has renounced woman and gold is surely a holy man. He is a holy man who does not regard woman with the eyes of a worldly person. He never forgets to look upon woman as his mother, and to offer her his worship if he happens to be near her. The holy man constantly thinks of God and does not indulge in any talk except about spiritual things. Furthermore, he serves all beings, knowing that God resides in everybody's heart. These, in general, are the signs of a true holy man. Neighbor, must one always live in solitude? Master, haven't you seen the trees on the footpath along a street? They are fenced around as long as they are very young. Otherwise, cattle destroy them. So this, of course, is an image familiar to those who have been to or are from India. Not so common here. But then here we don't have cattle and goats and things wandering in the streets of the cities. So that's the only reason we don't see it here. Otherwise, we would have to do the same thing here. In India, where animals are free to roam about, you have to fence around young trees so that the animals don't get the bark of them. Just recently, I noticed that a neem tree, which has gotten taller than me, up at our new retreat in Trinity, the deer have started rubbing their horns, the bucks who have their antlers coming out in this season, rubbing their horns against the trunk of this small little tree. They rubbed all the bark off of it. And so I put some stakes around it to keep them away, and hopefully they haven't done too much damage. But that's the idea. So you have to fence the image that he's making is you have to fence a tree around in order to keep the cattle and goats away from it, so they don't destroy it. But he says there's no longer any need of fences when their trunks grow thick and strong. Then they won't break, even if an elephant is tied to them. And I've seen in South India in the forest an elephant keeper who was catching and training wild elephants from the jungle, who had elephants tied to trees. Just so there will be no need for you to worry and fear if you make your mind as strong as a thick tree trunk. So that's what we have to do. First of all, try to acquire discrimination. Break the jackfruit open only after you have rubbed your hands with oil. Then its sticky milk won't smear them. Jackfruit is a wonderful fruit that grows in India, Southeast Asia, that we don't have here, though sometimes you find it in specialty markets, and you can find canned jackfruit in Indian stores. But it has a very sticky milk-like juice that comes out when you break it open, and that sticks onto your hands. So first you rub your hands in oil before you begin to handle the jackfruit. So all of this is to say that first make your mind strong by learning to think of God in solitude and or in the company of holy people. And then you'll be able to handle the world without being affected. Neighbor, what is discrimination? Master, discrimination is the reasoning by which one knows that God is real, God alone is real, and all else is unreal. Real means eternal, and unreal means impermanent. So see, again, he's coming back to the real, permanent, and the unreal, the impermanent. So he's not denying that the world is impermanent, but if one can see God within everything, one's mind sees the eternal in the midst of the non-eternal, and then the impermanence of the world doesn't bother us. He continues, he who has acquired discrimination knows that God is the only substance and all else is non-existence. God is the reality. There's the old distinction in Western as well as Eastern philosophy of the substance and the qualities in the substance. Like this, the table is of a certain size, of a certain material, certain structure, certain dimensions, and so forth. Those are the qualities that make the table a unique example of tableness. But the idea is that those qualities are modifying a substance. But the idea in Western philosophy that was given up in more modern philosophy was that there is a substance which to everything that has qualities, but that substance was basically material, and qualities were what qualified that substance. But in Vedanta, it's not that there is a physical material which has qualities. As far as what we perceive, they are only qualities. The substance is the reality, which is Brahman, which is beyond time, space, and causation. And so the substance of this table, of that chair, of people, of the concrete, of the sky, of the earth, everything is the same substance, which is Brahman. So he who has acquired discrimination knows that God is the only substance and all else is non-existence. The qualities are just appearances that come and go. With the awakening of this spirit of discrimination, a man wants to know God. On the contrary, if a man loves the unreal, such things as creature comforts, name, fame, and wealth, then he doesn't want to know God, who is of the very nature of reality. Through discrimination between the real and the unreal, one seeks to know God. So if we begin to understand that the world is impermanent and therefore unreal, ultimately unreal, then then we begin to conceive of the longing for God. As long as we take this as real and permanent and as the ultimate value, this is what we want, then God is just a comforting concept to some and a superstition to others, but nothing more. But once we begin to see that all of this is unreal, and conceive that there is a reality behind all of this appearance, then that's the beginning of spiritual life. Listen to a song. Come, let us go for a walk, O mind, to Kali, the wish-fulfilling tree, and there beneath it gather the four fruits of life. Of your two wives, speaking to his mind, of your two wives, dispassion and worldliness, bring along dispassion alone, only on your way to the tree, and ask her son discrimination about the truth. So here, let us go for a walk, O mind, to Kali, the wish-fulfilling tree. So the wish-fulfilling tree, the Kalpataru, is a mythological tree in Indian lore. If you sit under the tree, anything that you ask for will be fulfilled immediately. And so Kali, the Divine Mother, Kali, is here conceived of as the wish-fulfilling tree. So let's go to her, because if our minds dwell within the shadow of Kali, then whatever we wish for will come true. But that means that If we're living in the company of Kali, only higher desires become or arise in the mind. So it doesn't mean you can go to Kali and then wish for all kinds of worldly things. No. But if you come into the company of Kali, then the mind will be so purified that only the highest desires will arise, and those will be fulfilled. So, and there beneath it gather the four fruits of life. So according to traditional Indian thought, there are four fruits of life that people seek, knowingly or unknowingly. Most of them seek it unknowingly, but it is what they seek. One is possession, legitimate possession. Another is sense desire. A third is righteousness. Everyone wants to be thought of as good, and they want to think of themselves as good. So righteousness, dharma, which is a much more positive and a larger term than righteousness, and then moksha, freedom. Everyone seeks freedom, and so freedom is only found in spiritual liberation, complete freedom. But these are the four fruits of life. Possession, everyone has a desire to have things. And that is said in the Hindu tradition to be okay as long as you acquire things in a dharmic or in a moral way. Everybody wants to enjoy the senses. We like a good meal. We like comforts. We like enjoyments, etc. That also, Hinduism says, is okay as long as they are obtained legitimately and as long as you don't overdo them. Anything overdone will cause harm to you. But as long as you enjoy things within moderation and enjoy them within a moral context, then there's no harm in enjoyment. Third, righteousness, or dharma actually, which again means being a good person. And fourth, freedom, moksha. So of your two wives, dispassion and worldliness. So yes, the mind has two wives. It's wedded to dispassion and to worldliness. Two wives of opposing nature. The mind sometimes feels, even in very crude people, very worldly people, sometimes they feel dispassion. I've had enough of everything. I'm sick of everything. I don't want anything. So everybody has the capacity for dispassion, and everybody feels it once in a while. But for most people, it's only as a reaction, temporary reaction to disgust or to failure or to whatever. And then the other wife is worldliness. So sometimes we go towards one, sometimes towards the other. Most people go mainly towards worldliness and feel dispassion only in moments of tragedy or in moments of disgust. So bring along dispassion only. Leave your wife of worldliness and take only your wife of dispassion, O mind, on your way to the tree of Kali's name, and ask her son discrimination, viveka. So vairagya, dispassion, is your wife, and the child of your wife, dispassion, is discrimination about the truth. That is, knowing that this is true and that's untrue. This is a value, that's not a value. Spiritual discrimination. So then he continues, by turning the mind within oneself, one acquires discrimination, and through discrimination, one thinks of truth. Then the mind feels the desire to go for a walk to Kali, the wish-fulfilling tree. Reaching that tree, that is to say, going near to God, you can, without any effort, gather four fruits, namely dharma, artha, kama, moksha, the ones I mentioned, dharma or righteousness, possession, sense pleasure, and liberation. Yes, after realizing God, one can also get, if one so desires, dharma, artha, and kama, which are necessary for leading the worldly life. So yes, after realizing God, if one so wishes, one can have these others, not just moksha, but one can have artha, kama, and dharma as well. Neighbor, then why should one call the world Maya? Master, as long as one has not realized God, one should renounce the world, following the process of neti, neti, not this, not this. But he who has attained God knows that it is God who has become all this. Then he sees that God, Maya, living beings, and the universe form one whole. So everything forms one whole. God, Maya, universe, living beings, everything is one reality. God includes the universe and its living beings. Then you don't see a separation between God and the world. Suppose you have separated the shell, flesh, and seeds of a bell fruit, and someone asks you the weight of the fruit. So a bell fruit, actually, it's a rind, not a shell. It's not a nut, but the skin becomes hard on the outer coating becomes hard, and so it's like a shell. But actually, it's the rind or the skin of the bell fruit. So suppose you have separated the rind, the flesh, and the seeds of a bell fruit, and someone asks you the weight of the fruit. Will you leave aside the rind and the seeds and weigh only the flesh? Not at all. To know the real weight of the fruit, you must weigh the whole of it, the rind, the flesh, and the seeds. Only then its real weight. The shell may be likened to the universe, and the seeds to living beings. While one is engaged in discrimination, one says to oneself that the universe and the living beings are non-self and unsubstantial. So that process of neti neti, that I don't want the unsubstantial, I don't want the world, I want God alone. At that time, one thinks of the flesh alone as the substance, that is, the flesh being God, and the shell and seeds, the world, as unsubstantial. But after discrimination is over, one feels that all three parts of the fruit together form a unity. They're all part of the same thing. Then one further realizes that the stuff that has produced the flesh of the fruit has also produced the rind and the seeds. To know the real nature of the bell fruit, one must know all three: flesh, rind, and seeds. It is the process of evolution and involution. The world, after its dissolution, remains involved in God, and God at the time of creation evolves as the world. Butter goes with buttermilk, and buttermilk goes with butter. If there is a thing called buttermilk, then butter also exists. And if there is a thing called butter, then buttermilk also exists. If the self exists, then the non-self must also exist. So here it's a teaching which he made in many different ways on many different occasions, that you have to take the whole of reality to understand reality. That in spiritual life, where we usually begin by negating the world, seeing it as impermanent and not what we want God. But a time will come when we come closer to God, that we begin to see that it's God that has become the universe and all living beings. And so then the process of neti neti stops. Then it's just absorbing ourselves in a God whom we see in all states of consciousness and in all things. When we look inside, when we look outside, wherever we look. So that's what he is speaking about. And then the process of evolution and involution. After dissolution of the universe, when the universe collapses at the end of a cycle, collapses back into a seed state, then that's the dissolution of the universe. And in that dissolution, the universe remains involved in God. That is, it's inherent in God. It's in a seed state within God. And then it evolves back out of God. This universe is the result of evolution, not just biological evolution, but in Vedanta, as in Sankhya Hindu philosophy, evolution is something much more comprehensive than just a biological evolution. It's the coming out of the cosmic reality, the coming out of from the subtlest down to the grossest level of the physical universe. This physical universe is the grossest level of existence. The phenomenal world belongs to that very reality to which the Absolute belongs. Again, the Absolute belongs to that very reality to which the phenomenal world belongs. He who is realized as God has also become the universe and its living beings. One who knows the truth knows that it is he alone who has become father and mother, child and neighbor, man and animal, good and bad, holy and unholy, and so forth. So one who has realized God sees everything as God, recognizes everything as God. Just as a dog recognizes its master no matter what clothing the master is wearing, so one who has perceived God sees God within everything, not by imagination, not by hypnosis, not by an excess of emotion or whatever, but actually sees God in everything. Neighbor. Then there is no virtue and no sin. He's asking because Sri Ramakrishna says one sees God in the holy and in the unholy, in the good and in the bad. So then there is no virtue and no sin. Master. They both exist and do not exist. If God keeps the ego in a man, then he keeps in him the sense of differentiation and also the sense of virtue and sin. So as long as we have the I sense, the sense of being an individual, the sense of being the agent of action and the recipient of experiences, that is what the ego means. As long as we have that, then we will see virtue and sin. And if we try to pretend that they don't exist by the use of philosophy, saying that, well, virtue and vice don't exist, everything is Brahman, so I don't have to worry about virtue and vice, that won't work because karma will force, you will be forced to obey the law of karma. If you do bad things, you're forced to suffer for them. And so you can't get out of it. There's no escape from the law of karma except by giving up the ego, the sense of individuality, that which separates me from everyone else. So they both exist and do not exist. If God keeps the ego in a man, then he keeps in him the sense of differentiation and also the sense of virtue and sin. But in a rare few, he completely effaces the ego. And these people go beyond virtue and sin, good and bad. As long as a man has not realized God, he retains the sense of differentiation and the knowledge of good and bad. You may say, virtue and sin are the same to me. I am doing only as God bids me. But you know in your heart of hearts that those are mere words. No sooner do you commit an evil deed than you feel a palpitation in your heart. Even after God has been realized, he keeps in the mind of the devotee, if he so desires, the feeling of the servant ego, the das ami. In that state, the devotee says, "O God, thou art the master and I am thy servant." Such a devotee enjoys only spiritual talk and spiritual deeds. He does not enjoy the company of ungodly people. He does not care for any work that is not of a holy nature. So you see that God keeps the sense of differentiation even in such a devotee. So again, that long paragraph starts by saying that good and evil both exist and do not exist. They don't exist in the highest reality. When we come to the perception that God is everything, then we see God everywhere, and all relativity loses its meaning. Good and bad, sin and virtue, all of that loses its meaning. But such a person, to see that, has had to come to a high state of purity of mind, where all the dross of the mind has been burnt out. And then there's no question of doing bad things. And as such a person, the ego has been effaced. And so there's not even the sense of doing. Whatever then is done is done by God or done by nature, depending on one's perspective. It comes to the same thing. And so as long as we have the sense of ego, as long as we have the sense of I'm doing something, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm suffering, I'm happy, etc. As long as we have that sense of an individual, then we will perceive good and bad. And so as he says here, even if we pretend that there is no good and bad through philosophy, as I was saying before, saying that everything is Brahman, there is no good and evil, so what does it matter what I do? No, as soon as you do something bad, as he says, there's a palpitation in the heart, which of course is the basis for the lie detecting test. So, yes, certain people, especially people who are well trained at it and people who are psychopaths, they may be able to pass a lie detector test because they can lie without giving it away. But ordinary people can't do that. As soon as you tell a lie, even a bad person, as soon as they tell a lie, they know that they've told a lie, and it registers. So it won't do to pretend that there's no good and evil. And for a psychopath, the problem is not that they've gone beyond good and evil; it's that they don't even register the two, at least very little of the two. And so they have become insensitive to morality, except as it affects them. So again, we only go beyond good and evil and the effects of karma when we've gone beyond the limited I. And either we've identified with the cosmic I, or the I has disappeared and only God lives within us. So, from a Vedantic perspective, even then, if the I has disappeared and God alone lives within me, that's just another way of saying the same thing that the Jnani says. Then my identity has become one with God. So I haven't lost anything except for littleness and separation. Neighbor, you ask us, sir, to live in the world after knowing God. Can God really be known? Master, God cannot be known by the sense organs or by this mind, but he can be known by the pure mind, the mind that is free from worldly desires. And so, yes, the ordinary mind can't know God. The senses can't perceive God. Though, what about those like even Sri Ramakrishna who had visions in the waking state, looking at the world, and they had a vision of God? Sri Ramakrishna saw Sita walking towards him. He saw everything, the banyan tree, the Ganges, everything as normal, but there was Sita walking towards him, a spiritual vision. He saw Jesus in the same sort of vision. He saw everything as normal, but there was Jesus in the midst of it, coming, walking towards him and merging into him. And there were many other visions he saw also, that he saw with open eyes when he was aware of the world. So those don't contradict what is said, that the sense organs can't perceive God. So it's not the eyes that are seeing God at that time, because there might have been if there had been other people there looking in the same direction, they wouldn't have seen anything. They had eyes that Sri Ramakrishna saw, but they wouldn't have seen anything. Sri Ramakrishna saw it because something else was operating within him. So the eyes were operating, the ears were operating, but there was something else that was operating at the same time at a higher level that was revealing a spiritual reality to him. So that doesn't negate the fact that the eyes can't see God. But at the same time the eyes are operating, something else can operate. Normally, however, and in the case of Sri Ramakrishna as well, when God is perceived, the world has disappeared. And so we begin with the understanding that I can't see God with these eyes. I'll see God in consciousness itself. And so let me try to purify my mind so that that higher perception is awakened. So God cannot be known by the sense organs or by his mind, but he can be known by the pure mind, the mind that is free from worldly desires. So that's why Jesus says in the Beatitudes, part of the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." I often mention in that context that Swami Vivekananda used to say that if all of the scriptures and sacred and holy books and sacred traditions and religions and institutions of religion were lost to the world, and that one statement remained, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God," then religion would continue. Because that is the whole of religion in that one statement. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So if the heart is pure, then you see God, then you see reality. which is divine reality. That is the only reality. So blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Neighbor, who can know God? Master, right. Who can really know him? But as for us, it is enough to know as much of him as we need. What need have I of a whole well of water? One jar is more than enough for me. An ant went to a sugar hill. Did it need the entire hill? A grain or two of sugar was more than enough for the ant. So this is a good example of the problems we create for ourselves in spiritual life. We overthink spiritual life in a way that we don't ordinary practical life. And so if we are asked about, or we find out find out about the idea of the chosen ideal, the Ishta Devata, we think, well, why should I have a chosen ideal? I want the whole of reality. I don't want a chosen ideal. Why should I choose something? I want the whole of it. Eventually we find that no, the chosen ideal is the whole, or a window into the whole. But by having a chosen ideal, it gives something that the mind can hold on to. If God is just God, God becomes just God, just a concept. And so it's very hard to develop spiritually unless we have something which is more concrete than just God. And so if we have a chosen ideal, eventually we begin to feel a relationship, and that relationship begins to draw our mind into it. It takes time, and at first we may not feel much attraction, but with time, as attraction begins to dawn, then we realize the value of the chosen ideal. So I can quench my thirst with a pitcher of water. I don't need a whole well full of water. An ant can satisfy itself with a grain or two of sugar. It doesn't need a mountain of sugar. And so sugar is sugar, whether it's a grain or a mountain. It's still sugar. Sweetness is still sweetness. And so with God, wherever we touch God, at whatever point we touch God, we're touching God. Just as wherever we touch a hill of sugar, or wherever we taste a hill of sugar, we're tasting sugar. So it's the taste of sugar that we're after. It's the experience of God that we're after. So wherever we have that experience, that is the experience of God. So, neighbor, sir, we are like typhoid patients. How can we be satisfied with one jar of water? We feel like knowing the whole of God. So a typhoid patient feels an incredible thirst. No matter how much water they're given, they want more water. They can't quench their thirst. And so he says that we're like typhoid patients. How can we be satisfied with one jar of water? We feel like knowing the whole of God. Master, that's true. But there's also medicine for typhoid. Neighbor, what is that medicine, sir? Master, the company of holy men, repeating the name of God and singing his glories and unceasing prayer. I prayed to the Divine Mother, Mother, I don't seek knowledge. Here, take your knowledge, take your ignorance. Give me only pure love for you. Give me only pure love for your lotus feet. Holy company and repeating the name of God and singing his glories and unceasing prayer. That this is the medicine for the typhoid patient, meaning a patient who is suffering from the typhoid illness of worldliness. And so these are the medicines for that. And then he mentions the prayer, the famous prayer that he made, Mother, I don't seek knowledge. Take your knowledge and take your ignorance and give me pure love for thee. Take your right and take your wrong. Give me pure love for you. Take your virtue and take your vice and give me pure love for you. So that idea of seeking nothing but pure love for God, which means seeking nothing but God, because God is love. So then he continues, as is the disease, so must the remedy be. The Lord says in the Gita, O Arjuna, take refuge in me. I shall deliver you from all sins. So that's verse 66 of chapter 18. Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja. O Arjuna, give up everything else and take refuge in me alone. So take shelter at God's feet. He will give you right understanding. He will take entire responsibility for you. Then you will get rid of the typhoid. Can one ever know God with such a mind as this, meaning the ordinary mind? Can one pour 4 seers of milk or 4 pints of milk into a 1-pint pot? Can we ever know God unless he lets us know him? Therefore I say, take shelter in God. Let him do whatever he likes. He is self-willed. What power is there in man? So he ends this chapter with talking about the value and necessity for for surrender. So surrender to God, and everything will be taken care of. He says that take shelter at his feet. He will give you right understanding. He will take entire responsibility for you. So God will take the entire responsibility for us if we can surrender. So that's the condition. That's the hard part. That's why we need spiritual practice, because surrendering is not so easy. We think it sounds easy, that I'll surrender to God and then God's responsible for everything and I don't have to do anything. I don't have to make decisions. I'm not responsible anymore for anything. Sounds wonderful. Well, it is wonderful, certainly, if we could do it. But the ego won't let go. The ego wants to take responsibility for everything because it doesn't want to lose control, which means we don't want to lose control, we as individuals. And so it takes long practice and steady determination to learn to surrender to God. But if we're trying to surrender to God, if we're moving as we can through life and trying to surrender to God, life's experiences themselves will take us in that direction, because the ego is constantly getting blows, constantly getting blows. And so if we just let that happen while we try to keep our eyes fixed on God, then the ego will get all of the lessons it needs. It'll keep getting blows until finally it's ready to surrender. So what we have to do is to keep the compass of the mind pointed in the right direction. Pray, worship, think about God, pray to God, repeat the mantra if we have a mantra. Try to surrender by praying to God, let things happen according to your will. I have to make a decision. May I decide it according to your will, etc. Surrendering every decision to God and then making the decision because we have to. But with the sense of surrender, then gradually life itself takes care of the ego. So if we allow it. Most people don't allow it. Most people are struggling hard to preserve the ego. But if we let the ego receive its lessons, then we become all right. So this is the end of the chapter. Next time after the break, we will begin with chapter 16, which is in December of 1883. And so now let me give announcements, and then there's a question here. So for announcements, this is the last class for December, and there are no more lectures for December also. So for the rest of December, we have a break for the holidays. On Christmas Eve, however, we have those of you who are here and wish to come, that will be open. You don't have to register. It will be Christmas Eve at 7 o'clock here in the chapel. We'll have Christmas carols, singing of Christmas carols. We'll have a reading from the Nativity of Jesus, a short talk, not a lecture, but just a short talk on the meaning of Christmas, the inner meaning of Christmas. And that will be closed with arati, the waving of the lights. So it'll be no more than an hour-long service, maybe even a little less than an hour. So all are invited to that, 7 o'clock on Sunday. And then New Year's Day, we will have a celebration for Kalpataru Day. Uh, that will be January 1st, and it will be the observance of the day when Sri Ramakrishna revealed himself, his spiritual nature to his devotees. And also, it's the day when we observe the birth anniversary of the Holy Mother, Sri Sarada Devi. So on January 1st, starting at 10:30, we'll have a puja, a ritual worship to Holy Mother, followed by a short reading about Sri Ramakrishna's self-manifestation and arati, and then the distribution of prasad. We won't have a whole meal of prasad for everyone, but there will be prasad given in hand. So those are the announcements. And then in January, I'm going to be gone for 2.5 weeks, almost 3 weeks, to Bolivia. And so at that time, we haven't yet figured out the schedule, but the classes and lectures will be few in January. So they're ended for December, and they will be few in January. So now questions. If we surrender to God, does God take all decisions, or right knowledge to make the right decisions? So good question, as always. It's a little of both. In the beginning, we feel we begin to get a sense of what is right. We feel moved to make the right decision. At the highest level, we feel that we do nothing. The ego has disappeared to such an extent that the person feels that they are not making decisions at all, that God is doing everything. So yes, in the beginning, again, in the beginning of a high level of surrender, we feel that we are making the decision, but God is showing us what to do. So there's still a slight amount of a refined amount of involvement of decision making, but eventually we come to the point where we feel that we do nothing. So as Janaka says in the Ashtavakra Samhita, the realized soul feels burdened even by blinking the eye, meaning not that they don't blink or that they get frustrated because they have to blink. It means that even that they don't take responsibility for, that they do absolutely nothing. They have no sense of action whatsoever. They're completely above the idea of doing anything. And they see that the eyes blink, the mind thinks, the body walks, the body eats, but they are uninvolved. It's just like watching a movie as an uninvolved witness. When Sri Ramakrishna said to Girish Bose that the stench of a garlic container vessel would be removed by heating the vessel, did he mean doing tapas? Yes. He meant that, for those of you who don't know the incident, Sri Ramakrishna had said that through spiritual practice that one can get rid of the stench of worldliness, but that the stench is so strong sometimes that it doesn't go. Like he said, if you keep garlic in a container, even after you throw out the garlic and wash it, you still have the smell of garlic. You can't get rid of the stench. And so worldliness is very persistent if it's gone too far. And so then Girish asked, well, is there no way for people like me? Because Girish used to say that there was no sin that he had not committed. So Sri Ramakrishna said, yes, if you heat the jar the garlic has been in, after you throw the garlic away, if you heat the jar in fire, then the stench goes, which is true. And so, yes, the fire that you heat the jar in is tapas. That is the spiritual fire of spiritual practice. Through intensity of spiritual practice, doing japa, meditation, prayer, devotion, devotional singings, then even that stench can be destroyed. And the last question is just a simple question. Why are you going to South America? That's to see a devotee there about the possibility of maybe starting a group in Bolivia. So we'll see if something comes of it or not, but going to try. We'll see. So with that, we close 2022, except for our celebration of Christmas Eve. And then we close 2021 with the celebration of Christmas Eve. And we open 2022 with our New Year's Day celebration of Sri Ramakrishna's self-revelation and the birth anniversary of the Holy Mother, Sri Sarala Devi. So I wish all of you a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays and Happy Hanukkah and however it is that you celebrate the holidays. Wish all of you a blessed time and look forward to seeing those who can come on Christmas Eve, which, by the way, will also be live streamed. So those who can come or who can watch Christmas Eve, see you then. And otherwise, we'll see you in the new year. So let me close with a prayer. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Dhृतविग्रहं Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namah. We bow in adoration to Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, eternal, infinite, the worshipful Supreme Lord, who took human birth out of compassion for all. Om Shanti, 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all.